So, welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. We are going through the high Sabbaths. We're talking about holidays and things of that nature. We've spent the past, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks on the Passover. It's really the big major holiday for the Jewish community. And so we've been really focused on that and what all that means and what all takes place and so on. So that's really been our focus. And we're going to get into more of the biblical holidays over the next few weeks. My plan, by the way, is to try to be done with this by the end of the year and then start something new at the beginning of the year. And I said at church on Sunday, if there's something else that specifically you would like for me to teach on, to focus on, please let me know. I'm going to start the book of Luke here soon on Sunday mornings. I'll be preaching through that. So Wednesday nights, we can do whatever. I really see it as a chance to teach in class and get feedback and, to engage so that we're all learning. And so, whatever that you have on your mind, some subject matter, you want to talk about something that has to do with doctrine. I've thought about maybe we can, kind of go through how to develop your doctrine. We can maybe do something like that. We can focus specifically on certain aspects of God, the Holy Spirit, or Jesus Christ, or some of the Old Testament teachings, or the New Testament teachings, or history, which we're going to touch on tonight. A big part of tonight is really history of Israel. So whatever that may be, feel free to let me know. You can text me, email me, pastorg72@gmail.com, or you can private Facebook message me either on the church account or my own personal account. So whatever that may be, just let me know. Love feedback. I want to make sure that I'm teaching something that that you want to learn, that you want to that helps with your growth and understanding and your journey and that sort of thing. So just let me know, okay? Here very soon, we'll be back in our church area, right, where we have church, so that people can actually come on Wednesday nights as well. Our flooring is probably not going to be done this week, so it's probably going to be next week by the time the flooring is done. But we are so close to having all of our construction done, and so I'm really excited about that. And so I hope that you do think about joining us and being a part of our studies on Wednesday nights. Okay. So let's get back into it. We're talking about the holidays, the high Sabbaths, the special holidays that are observed in the Jewish community, and their holidays, just like ours, are meant to commemorate or to remember certain events within history. Obviously, in the Christian realm, we have Easter and Christmas, which are observance of the birth and then the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. But then America has our own holidays, right? That we use to commemorate things. 4th of July commemorates our independence and the formation of our country. We have Veterans Day, which is a day of remembering those who, have fought or been a part of our military. So we have all these different special holidays, and part of that is part of our religion, our belief system, and part of that is just about our history. The nation of Israel is no different. They have biblical holidays. We just talked about the Passover. That's a biblical holiday. Others like Rosh Hashanah, which we see in Numbers 29, or Yom Kippur, which we can read about in Leviticus chapter 16. Those are biblical holidays. They're very specific. They happen at a very specific time of the year, and there's very specific things that they do to commemorate those holidays. But then there's the non-biblical holidays. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about tonight are four relatively new holidays or remembrances that the nation of Israel, mainly in the nation of Israel, not so much out of it, but mainly in it, that they observe throughout the year. If we think about the nation of Israel and its history in just the past 70 years, so much has taken place within those 70 years. So we expand that to about 100 years, even more has taken place. But a lot has happened to them. For us to really truly understand these four holidays that we're going to talk about tonight, we really need to understand more about the history of Israel and the land that the nation of Israel possesses. So we've been going through the book of Joshua on Sunday mornings. We're about to wrap it up. As a matter of fact, this Sunday is the last sermon in that particular book on Joshua. And that whole book is a history lesson when it comes to the nation of Israel. It's a history lesson of, what they went through to possess the land that God had promised them. And so we see how they crossed the Jordan, how they went in, how they um, uh, took the land from the inhabitants and came to possess it. And then, if we continue on in this study, if we wanted to go through Judges and so on throughout the Old Testament, we see more of the history. When we get into the New Testament, and especially the Gospels, and then Acts as well, we see a continuation of that history with what happened with the Jewish community as it was in a land that they still possessed, but it was under a different rule, and that was the Roman rule. And that's really where we need to start to really understand the four things that we're going to talk about tonight. We really need to start with that history back in the Roman era. So what we see is that the Romans, as we go into the New Testament, Rome, the Roman Empire is ruling. Fast forward to Paul. Paul goes on his journeys. He establishes churches. He eventually ends up in Rome, and there's all these different Roman emperors, right? That are essentially, they're Caesars, but kings of Rome, essentially. Because of Paul's efforts and because of the spread of Christianity, eventually one of those Roman emperors becomes a Christian. And I actually touched on this a little bit on Sunday. That Roman emperor was Constantine. Constantine was the first Christian Roman emperor. And in a way, Constantine went just fully on board as he became a Christian and wanting to learn more and understand more. Constantine sent his mother to Israel to learn more about Christ and maybe where he was born and where he died and a lot of the areas in Israel, for instance, where they believe that Jesus was born, was because of Constantine's mother going there and doing research in order to discover all these different things. So the Church of Nativity, again, where it's supposedly where Jesus was born, that's where that was established. That's because of Constantine's mother. Anyway, to study Roman history then, and we learn how, as he went to Istanbul, he loved Istanbul and really made that the capital of the Roman Empire. He built the Hagia Sophia, which was this incredible church there in Istanbul. It still stands today. You can go there today and see it, although the current ruling body in Istanbul is wanting to revert that back to a mosque again. So eventually the Roman Empire is defeated in Turkey, and they take the Hagia Sophia and they turn it into a mosque. Then they kind of turn it into like a museum history kind of thing. And I got to go there and see that in 2004 and 2005. And now it looks like they're trying to revert it back to a mosque again. And I don't know what that does to the historical value as far as being able to go and look at it or travel around and see inside of it. But it is pretty amazing to kind of see. But in doing that, what we see then is a change that takes place within the Roman Empire, and it kind of moves from this Roman Empire terminology to the Byzantine era or empire. That came around 324. And again, it started with Constantine. And so what eventually happened, and let me also say this before I even go on. We all think about the suffering of the Jews, and we always put that on the Germans, and rightfully so. The Holocaust, a horrible thing. 6 million Jews died, and obviously an incredible, horrible event. But the group, the second, how can I put this? The group that is second on that list of causing problems to the nation of Israel, or at least a close second. Maybe I should say that it's high. It's high up. It'd be Christians. The Jews have suffered a great amount of persecution from Christians. Again, we look at Germany and the Nazis and what happened with the Holocaust, and that brought about, a horrible time period for the Jewish community. But Christians have also been a part of that as well, and it began with Constantine. So Constantine comes in, Christianity comes in, and all of a sudden, the Greek Orthodox Church dominates Jerusalem, and Jerusalem essentially becomes a Christian city. And Jews were actually banned from living in Jerusalem during this time. So this really kind of begins this era of Jews being pushed out of the land that God had promised them. Um, and this continues on. There is a Jewish revolt against one of the Roman governors. The Jewish population rebelled against them, and eventually that revolt was subdued. Then we see, emperor after emperor, doing some things to the Jewish nation. Then a guy named Julian comes in 361. And Julian abolished the special taxes paid by the Jews. He tried to help them rebuild and to populate Jerusalem. So Julian, for whatever reason, saw that something bad was happening to the Jewish community in their own land, and he did not agree with it. And so Julian tried his best to help them rebuild their home. But it was short lived. He was only emperor from 361 to 363. It didn't last very long. So the Jewish community once again was being oppressed by the Romans. We see this number of Jewish people living in the area go up at some point, but then begin to decline once again. Many were being exiled, they were leaving. Again, there was a Jewish revolt against the Byzantine Empire. That eventually was squashed as well in 1614. So this great number of Christians again are moving into the area, and it was just a really horrible time. Then something crazy kind of happens when you really think about it. But around 638, the Byzantine Empire was defeated by the Arab Islamic Empire. And believe it or not, the Islamic Empire actually allowed the Jews to come back into their land and to rebuild and to try to repopulate and to build their synagogues and do a lot of different things that the Roman Christians had taken away from them. So that happened for a number of years. Then in 1099, the Crusades began. And I don't know what you know about the Crusades, and I don't know what you understand about the Crusades, but I always felt like, I guess, and just not paying attention enough or not knowing enough that the Crusades were really against Islam, but it wasn't. So the Crusaders make their way into Palestine and into Jerusalem and eventually take over. And it was horrible for the Jews. Again, they wanted to ban the Jews. They were killing Jews. Like I read a thing where like 6,000 Jews died because they were in this synagogue and they set the synagogue on fire and they all died in this fire. It's a huge massacre that takes place by these Christian crusaders. And they were trying to do everything, under this rule. The Jews were not allowed to hold land, really involve themselves in commerce. They were really denied a lot of their rights that they should have in their own land. Again, many were persecuted. And what's interesting is that the Jews fought alongside Muslims in trying to push back the Crusaders. So, it kind of messes with your mind a little bit because we've always kind of put this anonymity between the Jews and Arabs, um, or those other people groups in the Middle East. But there was a point in history where they actually fought together against the Christians because the Christians were being so oppressive and the Christians were persecuting the Jews so bad. And I just find that fascinating because today our mindset of who is more favorable to the Jews and who's not is totally reversed. Today, we would say their greatest allies are Christians and their greatest enemies are those of the Nation of Islam. So I find that interesting when we look at history and we see, how it unfolds. But at any rate, so during the Crusades, again, we see this, you know, mass persecution against the Jews. Then around 1211, actually in 1187, let me backtrack. In 1187, there's a guy that comes in, Sultan Saladin, I think is how you pronounce his name. And he comes in and he actually defeats the Crusaders and pushes most of them out. And during this time, again, the Jewish community is strengthened again. There's a revival of the group. There's people coming back, migrating back into the area once again. And there's a flourish of things that begin to take place within the Jewish community. Then in 1511, the Ottoman Empire comes in. So the Crusaders, excuse me, the Crusaders come back in, they kind of take control again, but then there's another uprising, and a Turkish sultan, Salim, comes in around 1516, 1517, somewhere around there, again defeats the Crusaders and begins the Ottoman Empire or the Ottoman rule. Again, under the Ottoman rule, the Jews begin to flourish once again. We see migration happening back in once again. We see the Jewish community starting to thrive once again. Now, I want you to keep in mind, too, right now, the Jewish community in Israel is somewhere between 5 and 6 million, somewhere around there. So that is the largest population in the world in one area, right? In Israel, that's the largest Jewish population. But when we look back at some of these time periods, I mean, we're talking maybe 100,000 people were in Jerusalem, or maybe even less than that during some of these rules. The Ottoman rule, or the Byzantines, or the Crusaders. Depending on the era, some estimates have them at maybe at 20 to 30,000. So all of the Jews that get pushed back, they get back in again, they get pushed out again, they get persecuted again. And what's interesting is when the British Mandate comes in. So the British finally take over the area and they defeat the Ottoman Empire. And during World War One, and I think this is really kind of fascinating. During World War One, there was a Russian Jew His name was Chaim Wiseman. And Wiseman migrated to England in 1904. And he was I believe a chemist, if I remember correctly. I think he was a chemist. Anyway, the guns in World War One, when you shoot, there'd be a big puff of smoke, and it would really blind the person shooting the weapon for a period of time. It was hard to aim. Once you reload, you kind of have to wait. And when every time you fire, there's a big plume of smoke, the enemy knows exactly where you are. But acetone is something they would use in the gunpowder to help reduce that. Well, acetone came from Germany. Well, if you're at war with Germany, Germany's not going to give you acetone. So Wiseman is approach to help try to create a synthetic acetone, and he does, and the British use it, and it is of great help. Because of that, he gains a lot of influence. So World War One ends, Germany loses, and Britain remembers Wiseman. Wiseman becomes this great, excuse me, uh, pusher. There's a word I can't think of, but um, advocate. He becomes this great advocate to return Israel to its people, to the nation of Israel. Because of what he did for Britain and the rest of the Allies in World War One, Britain promises that they're going to do everything they can to get Israel, the nation of Israel, back into their land, and that's exactly what they do. They declare or make this declaration that this is the national home for Israel. And so Israel begins to move back into the area. So the Jews that had been expelled by the Ottomans, so the Ottomans helped, but at some point in time, the Ottomans, pushed them out. They're starting to come back through. And so we see migration beginning to take place. 40,000 Jews go back, another 20,000, another 60,000, and they start coming back into the nation of Israel. So the nation of Israel is coming in, but it wasn't until 1947 and 1948 when they actually are going to take over the nation of Israel. So 1948, as Israel's moving in, right, and still establishing themselves, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq come together to attack Israel and to take the land back. But Israel pushes them out and wins the war. And that really is the true beginning of Israel once again establishing their land in Israel and taking back over everything. So what we're going to talk about tonight, in the time that we have remaining, are 4 relatively new holidays that now exist because of the most recent history dating back to 1948 that commemorate these big major events in the nation of Israel. So I gave you about a couple thousand years of the history of Israel in about 10 or 15 minutes. It goes much deeper than that, and I encourage you to read more and learn more. It is fascinating to see how the nation of Israel went from this occupying the land that God said this is yours to not having it anymore, and then eventually getting it back, all because one man helped out Britain, who then helped them get their land back. Which is interesting too, because where did the Crusaders come from? But Britain. So at any rate, let's get into these 4 holidays. The first one that I want to talk about is the day of the Holocaust. This was established by an act of the Israeli parliament in 1951. It happens 5 days after Passover. There was, and still is, to a certain degree, some pushback on it. There are some that In the nation of Israel and Judaism, believe that there's another day that's set aside for what they do on this particular day. But nonetheless, the nation of Israel and Israel mainly commemorate this particular day, the day of Holocaust. It is meant to memorialize the 6 million Jews who died in the Holocaust, and that is such an unbelievable number. To think that that many people died at the hands of the Nazis for so long. But this day is meant to remind, it's meant to memorialize those who died. It is meant to, um, you know, to mourn these 6 million people that died. So here's what happens in the synagogues. They have special candles. There's 6 special candles they light representing the 6 million Jews that died during the Holocaust. They say a special Kaddish, which is a special prayer or prayers that are given. Parts of the Shoah are shown. Shoah is a French documentary about the Holocaust, and so they will show parts of that film in some of the synagogues, and some may show the whole thing, but definitely parts of it are shown. Uh, Throughout the years, special liturgies have been written by rabbis and lay people and others to help commemorate this special day. In Israel, a siren is sounded as a way to commemorate, and then there's an official torch lighting ceremony that takes place at Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem is the Holocaust Remembrance Center. It is basically a place that people can go learn more about the Holocaust and how it happened and everything. So I think one of the things that, trying to wrap your mind around is how did the Germans get so many of these Jews? If again, going back to that history part, right? So many Jews were not living in the nation of Israel. They were all across Europe. So as Germany goes through and they conquer, France and Italy and all these other countries in Europe, whenever they run across Jews, they're just rounding them up. They single them out, and then when they're ready to go in and arrest them, and they take them to the concentration camps or do whatever it is that they do to them. And the Germans don't see the Jewish people, as human beings. And obviously, when we learn about the Holocaust, we can see how they were treated, not like human beings, in most cases like animals, with no regard to their health, to their safety, to their lives at all. And so the day of Holocaust is just this great remembrance of this and mourning of this horrific event that took place in the history of the world. So that is the day of Holocaust. The next one is the Israeli Independence Day. Now, just like us, we celebrate independence, right? When we had the Revolutionary War, independence from Great Britain, and so on. We get together and we have a cookout and we watch fireworks and that sort of thing. The nation of Israel has something very similar. Again, it's a day of celebration. It's a celebration to the end of the British Mandate that allowed the Jews to come back into the nation of Israel, that allowed them to establish the nation of Israel once again, and the establishment of that nation in 1948. It's mainly celebrated in Israel, right? As I mentioned before, the 4 that we're talking about today are really mainly celebrated in Israel. They have parades, they have parties in the synagogue, they have special music and speeches that talk about the state of Israel during that particular time. And then there is a special prayer that is given called the Prayer for the State of Israel. And they have special prayer as well for soldiers, fallen soldiers. Then there's the Day of Remembrance. So this would be the equivalent of Memorial Day or Veterans Day. They commemorate the nation's war casualties. And again, the nation of Israel has been through a whole lot of wars. Just to give you, an overview. Again, going back to 1948 when they fought Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq. In 1956, they had the Suez Crisis. In 1967, the Six-Day War. In 1973, the Yom Kippur War. In 1982, the Lebanon War. And then again in 2006, the Lebanon War. So they've known a lot of wars. And there's still the ongoing conflict with Palestine. We see rockets constantly being shot over into Israel, and Israel retaliates. I mean, they've just known so much war over the years. So it's hard to find someone, even to this day, right now, who hasn't been in some way, shape, or form affected or touched by the many wars that have happened over the years. So here's what happens. At 11 a.m., they have this sirens sound throughout the nation of Israel. And then right after the sirens sound, there is a 2 minutes of silence that takes place throughout the nation. And then the rest of the day, they have communal and official memorial services at Mount Hezel, which is like a military type cemetery that they have in Israel. There is a torch lighting at the Western Wall, and then many people will actually go to cemeteries and lay stones and whatnot on tombstones and that sort of thing. Again, very much like our Memorial Day and Veterans Day, it's just a time to reflect over everything the nation's been through, those who gave their lives. So it's just kind of a neat day that they have. Then finally, the newest of the holidays is the Jerusalem Day. Jerusalem Day celebrates the reunification of Jerusalem in 1967. This took place after the Six-Day War. So, 1948, they pushed back, the Arab world, if you will. These, 6 nations that came in to fight. But there were still parts of the nation that were occupied. And one of those was Jerusalem. Jerusalem was half Jewish and half under Islamic or Arab rule. The Six-Day War is essentially them going into Jerusalem and pushing back that element that now brings Jerusalem completely under the nation of Israel. And that's the first time that's happened in like 2,000 years. So that Six-Day War was a huge deal for the nation of Israel to get Jerusalem back fully. It was no longer split. They now control it, rule it, if you will. And it's the first time that had happened in 2,000 years. So they commemorate that day with Jerusalem Day. And so they have special ceremonies and all kinds of things throughout the city, throughout the country, actually, but mainly in Jerusalem, again, which was under someone else's rule for over 2,000 years. So that is not only a brief history of the nation of Israel being in and out of the nation, through exiles and persecution, but also now almost fully back. Because if we study and we know and we watch the news and that sort of thing, they don't fully possess all of the land that God said was yours, but they do possess most of it today. So that is a look at those things. And now, as we head back next week into the biblical holidays, that will give you a little more insight into certain things that we're going to be studying and looking at and understanding. And we'll talk more like about the Yom Kippur War and things of that nature too. We'll throw some more history in there, and we'll be looking more at scripture starting next week. Okay. Again, if there's anything any questions you have, please let me know. If there's something you want to study after we're done with this, please let me know. PastorG72@gmail.com. You can text me, call me, private Facebook message me on our Facebook page or my own personal page, or come see me at church, 9:30 Sunday school, 10:30 worship service at 940 South Kings Highway. We hope that you come and worship with us and dive into the Word with us, we'd love to have you. Okay. So until then, thanks for joining me tonight. I hope you have a blessed rest of the week, and we'll see you Sunday morning. All right. Good night.